Good morning, everybody. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you ever so much for joining everybody today. We have a stellar lineup of speakers for you today for our webinar of what mapping data can tell us. My name's Lee Newton. I'm the head of consumer operations at Ordnance Survey, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm going to be your host for today. I've had some significant IS problems this morning, so if we do swap hosts midway through, then you'll understand why. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we can have a fantastic webinar, and we'll just run through the running order for you today. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. One back. Lovely, thank you. So first of all, quick housekeeping. We're not expecting any fire alarms today, so no need to evacuate any buildings. But we will be recording the seminar, or the webinar today. So if you could please mute your mic and turn off your camera, that will certainly help with the bandwidth that we've got. Webinar, as I said, has been recorded and it will be made available following the event. And we'll also send out some slides for everybody as well. So no need to scribble any kind of notes down. If you can keep any comments or ask any questions into the chat function as well, we'll get to those either through the presentation or at the Q&A session at the very end. As I said, the Q&A sessions and the breakout rooms, please just raise your hands when we do get to the Q&As, and then we'll come to you as soon as we can. And next slide, please, Elizabeth. So the agenda for today, we've got maps are just the starting, just the tip of the iceberg from Danny. He's our senior technical relationship consultant here at Ordnance Survey. He's a geology graduate with a doctorate in geology of the Falkland Islands and has over 22 years experience at Ordnance Survey. Danny has a particular interest in evangelising geography in education and has been doing so in schools and outreach programmes for a number of years. So a really fantastic speaker within Danny. Then we're going to move on to maps with a so what with Paul Naylor. Paul is a technical relationship consultant at Ordnance Survey. He's got over 23 years experience in creating maps and visualizing data using a range of GIS design and web applications. Paul is also the Vice President and Programme Chair of the British Cartography Society and is responsible for the annual programme of events and helping the Society develop and grow their membership. And then lastly, a real treat, we've got Tom Knights, the Partnership Manager at Strava Metro. He's going to be talking about crowdsourced data in planning. Tom is an avid runner, rider and walking, and he really kind of goes through and enjoys getting together groups of community athletes. Within Strava, there are over 94 million, and that figure is growing rapidly as well. His background has been working with public sector clients on infrastructure projects across the world and improving the way we plan and move around our communities. And then lastly, we'll have a quick Q&A with the speakers, and then we'll just close off. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. Fantastic. So without further ado, we'll launch straight into our first speaker, which is Danny, and he's going to talk about maps, so just the tip of the iceberg. Over to you, Danny.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, cool. Can you see the screen? Anyone? Good. Right, thumbs up, that do. Okay, so maps just tip of the iceberg. So a lot of, well, I'll come back to that. First off, I'll get this to me. What do I want to talk to you about today? So the aims of what I want to get across is that. We okay? Okay. The Ordnance Survey does a lot more than just the paper maps that people think we do. So I want to give you an impression of the stuff that we do and the data that we produce. And then I also want to give you, hopefully leave you going away with some ideas about what you could do with that data and some of the stuff that you could ask to do with it and achieve with it. That's the idea. That's what I want to get across. So what OS is known for. So we're known for the paper maps that Lee and his part of the organisation work with, and this data on the left-hand side. Hopefully this is going to work with sound. So this is the kind of stuff that we're known for. stop that before we get to the branding that's out of date, because that's quite an old video. But that's what we're known for. We're known for getting outside. We're known for the great outdoors. We're known for explorer mapping and things like that. However, what most people don't know us for, before the video really starts, is all of this stuff. So this is a lot of the data sets that we have available as an organisation that most people have no idea about. So as successful as the consumer side of the business is, it's kind of less than 10% of the revenue, and that's no criticism of it. It's just this side of the business is far more involved, and there's a lot more data in here. So I'm going to talk through some of this lot in quite quickly, but just to give you an impression of the range of stuff that we do that's outside of the paper mapping world that we have. Now, some of you, I believe, may be customers who get access to this through a thing called the public sector geospatial agreement. So some of you will have access to this, some of you may not, but I'm just going to kind of go through and have a look at what we've got. So on the left-hand side, we've got a product called Master Lab Topography layer, which is the really, really detailed stuff that we do that goes all the way down to every single house and garden and curb line and road and patch of grass and things like that. So it goes down to that level, and it's all got house numbering and everything else on it. So that's the stuff that we spend all our time and energy on. That's our surveyors are going out and doing. So we've got 250 surveyors out in the field capturing that. Accompanied with that, we've got building heights information, so you can then start to look at 3D modelling. You can then start to work out where all the tall buildings are, things like after the things like cladding and tower blocks and stuff like that. You can start to use that data to look for things like that. Got aerial photography as an imagery layer. That's not part of the public sector agreement, but we do have that. This just gives you an indication as to how often that stuff is being updated. So we've got 250 surveyors out on the ground, and they are updating it every day. Our customers get access to that every 6 weeks. So every time this image changes is 6 weeks worth of change. So the orange bits are things that have stopped being a field but haven't become a school yet. There's the school, or haven't become houses yet. It just gives you an indication of the level of change that is going on throughout this data, day in, day out, across the whole country as the surveyors and from aerial photography is being updated. I'm not going to let that run all the way through because it gets a bit less interesting further on. Okay, so we've got this topography data, which is the really detailed stuff we've got for the whole country. We've then also got networks data. So we've got a road network on the left-hand side here, which has got lots of things like road routing information. So if you want to do routing to a site or where people are coming from, you've got roads information you can start to use. We've got average speeds data as well. Again, not part of the agreement. These little triangles tell you whether they're part of the agreement or not. We've got average speed data, so you can start to do drive time and things like that. We've got path networks within urban areas, and we've got path networks within national parks. That is going to be expanded shortly so that it's path networks across the whole country. And then we've also got a water network, so you can start to look at river flows and things like that. Then we have addressing. So we've got an address for every property that receives mail. So if you like, everything that Royal Mail has got, we've got an address for all of those. We also have addresses for what you would consider to be non-addressable features, so things like fountains or road names or public toilets or warehouses that don't receive mail or church halls and things like that. So we've got addresses for all of those, and we've got various levels of addressing going increasing complexity. But we also, as an organisation, Ordnance Survey covers Great Britain as opposed to Northern Ireland. However, we do a data set for addressing that covers Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man and Channel Islands as well. So we can give a full UK address data set. So we have addressing as well, which goes down to individual property level. We also have another data set called points of interest, which is more of a kind of business listing. So where's my nearest restaurant, car park, feng shui consultant, that sort of thing. That kind of stuff is all in points of interest. So we have that national as well. Then we get into things that are starting to look at land use, if you like. So on the left-hand side, we've got sites. Now, sites gives you things like airports, it gives you hospitals, it gives you education, it gives you like air, road, rail, water, transport as sites. So this is the extent of the airport, this is the extent of the port, this is the extent of the bus station, service station, that kind of thing. And then extensive schools, including all their playing fields and hospitals and things like that. We've also got the entry and exit points for all of those. And then we also have green space. So we have urban green space, so things like playing fields, allotments, sports facilities, bowling greens, tennis courts, cemeteries, people going around looking at things like family trees. And again, we've got entry and exit points for all of those things as well. So you can find out where the nearest one of those is. Then we do the stuff that people are familiar with. So we've got this one on the right, which is, as a product, is 1 to 50,000 scale, but everyone knows a Land Ranger. One in the middle, 25,000, everyone knows an Explorer. And then we go down to 1 to 10,000, which is called Vector Map Local. And again, with this, you can start to change how it looks. You can change its style because it's a different type of product. We also do height data. So we do contours and height models. So you can take all the height data and you can put it into the right software package and you can make it look like a lovely 3D model like this. That's then really useful if you want to start doing things like, if I put a wind turbine here, who can see it? Or if I want to put a walking route from here, what's the view going to be like? That sort of thing. So then you can start to use that for doing kind of nice 3D modeling and things like that. So that was a very quick run through the top 2 rows of that sheet that I showed you earlier on. All of those ones are premium products. They're all part of the public sector agreement and they are all paid for normally if you're not in an agreement. The bottom 2 rows are all open products that you can go, anyone can get, anyone can do whatever they like with, as long as they acknowledge Ordnance Survey. And so if you don't necessarily want to dip your toe into using all the paid for stuff, there's a whole load of open things. So just quickly going through those, you've got open green space, equivalent of the detailed stuff. We have open roads, which is the equivalent of highways, open rivers, the equivalent of water network. We've got terrain 50, which is a less detailed version of the height stuff I showed you. We've got Open Map Local, which is a less detailed, free version of HEX Map Local. When I say free or open, they are free or open, but they will obviously have less detail in them, which is why we're prepared to give them away for open. So river network is less detailed than the water network. The road network doesn't have things like road and route restrictions on it, things like that. There's no speed data, it's just a basic road network, that sort of thing. Vector Map District is the equivalent of these 2, roughly. And then we have the things like the road atlas level and the kind of national level. We also have postcodes, a postcode point data set that we have as an open data set. We also have open names, which gives you postcode, place names and road names as an open data set, as a series of points. So you can look up road names, you can look up place names, you can look up postcodes. And we've also got things like boundaries. So that gives you administrative and political boundaries. So all of the wards, all of the electoral constituencies, all of the local authorities, districts, counties, all that stuff. I haven't mentioned Open Zoom Stack yet. Now, open names, that is an example of a product that you can either get as a data set, as a set of points, or you can get as an API. Now, I don't know how many of you know what API is. It stands for Application Programming Interface, but basically it's a way for you to get data over the internet directly to your screen without you having to hold it. Probably the most commonly known one of them would be Google Maps. Sorry to say that as a member of Ordnance Survey, but that's the one that most people will know. You haven't got a set of their maps set on your computer, you're calling it over the internet and it comes onto your browser. And so we have a set of APIs that you can use to get hold of this stuff, and Open Names is one of them. And I'll mention a few more in a minute. This last one is Open Zoom Stack. Now, in response to some of the questions that people have asked prior to this, people have mentioned mobile mapping. One of the options for that is to use an API. So as long as you've got 4G or wireless, you can get that data straight through to your device, as long as you've coded it to be able to do that. The other option is this product, which is Zoom Stack. We've used a whole load of our open data, put it all together into a single file. So we've got a single 10 gig file that covers the whole country, and it goes down from kind of national level down to street level with zoom thresholds built into it, so that as you zoom through, stuff turns on and stuff turns off appropriately as you go through. So you can go all the way down to street level. And that's a 10 gig file. You can put it on a device and take it away with you, and you can style it any way you like. And in terms of styling it, for any of you on this call who are colour visual deficiency or colourblind, the stuff on the left is normal sight, the stuff in the middle is red green, and the stuff on the right is blue yellow, and they are optimized to those. So just in case any of you are going, but that one in the middle, the colours look really bright, I can see those. That's because they've been made those colours to optimize for red green. They are more intense, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily colourblind. The one on the left is the normal colour scheme, but that is a Zoom Stack. So you can change the colours on it, you can take it away with you. It's got national coverage, and it's really quite useful in that respect. You can get hold of the data now through a thing called the OS Data Hub. You can get hold of a load of our products through there, and we're about to make some of the premium stuff went available in the summer, and we're going to make a download version, a download API for that. But on APIs, I've mentioned names that you can do. You can also do maps as an API. You can also do vector maps as an API. You can also do features as an API. There's loads of different ways of pulling data down. I'm not going to go into a load of detail now or do a demo because I haven't got that much time to be able to do that. But just to say that they're all there and those things are available. So what do people do with all of this stuff? So at one level, people just want a map. And so I've got a map here, which is a National Trust site out near Bristol. So it's like, okay, here's a map of our site. I can go down to a really detailed smart map level. I can then plot on here the extent of our site. So I've done the land registry extent on here. Now, the other thing to start mentioning is, although I've kind of said, here's a load of Ordnance Survey data, we're not the only provider of mapping information. We've probably got the best information at a base level, but actually you're going to have your own information that you want to put on top of that. So this information comes from Land Registry. I'm going to show you some stuff that comes from Office of National Statistics. There's loads of different places to get layers of information to put on top of ours. So this is like a site extent. Now, sometimes you might be capturing your own information where you're going to go, actually, I'm going to digitize around these woods, say these woods are ours, or this track is ours or whatever. The only thing I would say is if you can digitize that stuff over the top of our detailed information, it gives you the most accurate data that you can get, because then when you start to layer other information, things line up and don't overlap and things like that. So some people just want a map. This is then starting to look at addresses and starting to plot those addresses. So this was from a demo we did a few years ago showing that when you have a list of information, it says one thing, but when you start to put it on a map, it gives you other information. So this is a list of information. The idea was it was an insurance demo, and go, you know, you've got all these insurance things, they've all got different postcodes, they're all fine. But actually when you plot them, sorry to anyone who's colorblind on this one, we've got all the red dots is the location of all of those addresses. And so actually, or postcodes, and you can see that I'm pointing at the screen, there's no point in pointing at the screen. I'm pointing at the screen, all the red dots are all clustered. So you can see that actually those things are really close to each other. They're either side of a postcode boundary. They're in the middle, you can see they're either side of a postcode boundary, but actually they're in the same building in this case, and they're all clustered. Now, applying that on a bigger scale, if you apply that nationally, this image actually shows, on the left shows the locations of all the staff in my team, and on the right shows you the customers from the public sector geospatial agreement. But they could just easily be on the left, your sites, and on the right, people who visited your sites. Forget colour polygons and background. So you could then start to go, actually, where are all the customers who visited us? I know I've visited National Trust or British English heritage sites where they ask you a postcode. Places like IKEA ask you a postcode, so they want to know how far you come to their site. So you can then start at postcode level to plot where all the people are coming from. You could then, if you wanted to, start to then colour those up and say, well, actually, let's colour them up by how far they've travelled to get to their site, or which site they visited, that sort of stuff. So you can then start to take information about visitors, plot that on a map, and then start to get further information about it, about how far people are prepared to travel, or maybe go, actually, looking at this, I haven't got that many visitors who are coming from Wales, why not? Maybe you need to do some different marketing in Wales, or maybe promote stuff, that sort of stuff. So one of the main messages is actually you can get information out of, by putting things on a map, you get information that you can't get any other way. It helps you make better decisions by putting stuff on maps. You could start to look at drive time. So I've mentioned our road networks. I've mentioned speeds information. So you could do speed, distance, in terms of how far you can get in a certain time, or you could just do distance, as in it's 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles. So you could then start to say, well, actually, how easy is it to access these sites by road? How easy? How far is it? How long is it going to take people to get there? However, not everyone comes by car, and so people are looking at things by active travel. And so actually this was some work we did with Greater Manchester Authority, looking at a whole load of stuff about how things have changed over time, how many addresses have appeared, how many buildings have appeared, what was the makeup of the city and how that had changed over a 10-year period. Part of that was accessibility. So this was then looking at the rail network and railway stations, and also the tram network, and saying, well, actually, how accessible is it to get to a train station on foot in terms of walking distance? And so we've got this by 500 metre, 500,000, 2,000, 3,000 distance for somebody to walk to a train station, and how easy is that? Similarly, you could then look at that by bike. and how easy is it to cycle. So then doing that by time, so 5, 10, 15 minutes to cycle to a train station. So in that respect, you could then expand that out beyond, in this case, Manchester, and say, well, actually, this is the main train line that it takes to get to the area of interest that I want to know, or one of my sites, and actually how easy is it for people to get there. I think it's quite a lot of sites that people want to go walking in aren't necessarily accessible by a train station, unless you go to the New Forest and you go to Beaulieu Road Station, which is slap bang in the middle, which is quite useful. So, you know, how easy is it to access it by alternative methods other than by car? And so you can start to use the data to do that. Now, this is where you can start bringing third-party data. This is looking at, it's got demographics, but actually this is data from Office of National Statistics looking at deprivation, which was a substitute for demographics, because ONS deprivation data is available freely. And you can see in this one, red is deprived, dark green is not deprived. And so you could then start to say, if you looked at where your visitors are coming from, you could plot it against this and say, well, actually, you know, what kind of demographics are people coming from, or what kind of demographics are people driving from? Are they coming, you know, is it certain areas that are not driving or are driving, or is it certain people are coming by public transport? Now, this is the stuff from ONS. There's also the actual proper demographics data is you get from Experian as mosaic data, or CACI as acorn data, and that's your kind of a phrase known as ABC ones, which certainly in the retail sector is the kind of target market that people are going after. So you could then bring in demographic data to kind of, again, different way of looking at the same thing. What kind of people are coming to your area? What kind of people are traveling? How are they traveling? That kind of stuff. Give an example of that. We did this work for a charity called UK Youth a few years ago. It's got the old branding on it. And this was looking at the locations of their youth clubs in London at the time versus deprivation. And they'd never seen anything like this. And we said, oh yeah, we could do that probably. That's quite straightforward. And it showed them that a lot of their blue dots, again, give me for anyone who's colour proficiency, it's all blue, greens and reds on this map. The blue dots are showing where all their youth clubs are. And it showed that most of their youth clubs were in deprived areas, which is what they wanted. But it also showed up some deprived areas around here and up here, around here, up here, and over here that had no provision. And they would never have known that, because they wouldn't have known that there was a gap to know that they needed to fill it somehow. So this is quite a good example of a charity using our data, and it's actually quite straightforward stuff. You'd probably, the only thing on here that isn't open data would be swapping the background map for one of the open products that you can now get. You can use it in software that's quite straightforward to use, that's as open source software. So, you know, it's not that difficult to get set up and doing this kind of stuff. And then lastly, from me, this is looking at green space accessibility. So I've mentioned we've got a green space product, and then this is looking at the colours on this particular one are not the best. I'll explain it on this one. So the darkest green is the actual locations of the green space. The light green is a distance buffer from that, and the red is is outside of that buffer. So if I go back to the first one, this is looking at green space that is at least 2 hectares in size, and looking at 300 meters distance from it. So it's kind of like, you know, where are the local parks that people can walk to? Then we go up to larger areas which are kind of 20 hectares in size, and that people can 2 kilometers away. So in Southampton, that might be all the parks in the middle, or the common in the middle of Southampton, or something like Hyde Park in London, or that sort of size. That's the kind of stuff we're looking at here. Then we get to the very big ones. So if you notice, it's the same sites all along. It's just we're just cutting them down. We go to 100 hectares in size and 5 kilometres away. And so more and more of Manchester is then not having access in this case. And then we get to the big stuff. So this is the national parks. And again, this isn't just our green space. So national parks are part of this. We got data from the Woodland Trust looking at their woods that you can access, that kind of thing. So again, it's not only OS stuff. It's bringing data from all kinds of different sources and bringing it together. What you could then start to do on the wrong way there is in the red areas and the green areas, you could then start to pull up all the addresses that are inside there and go, okay, which addresses have got access, which addresses don't have access. And then again, looking at those against demographic data, you then say, well, actually, which in terms of what parts of the city in terms of makeup have got access or haven't got access. Do we need to do something about that? Do we need to, are those people that are in more deprived areas got access to these bits? Are the people who maybe don't have access to a car got access to a train station that would take them to these? You know, there's all kinds of questions that you could start to ask if you start to combine this data together. Okay, so hopefully in 20 minutes, I've managed to get across A, the range of stuff that Ordnance Survey does beyond the paper maps that most people are familiar with, and B, some of the things that you could do with it, and some of the things that you could start to bring together and combine to answer different questions about different things that geography can help you answer a question to. Now, hopefully I've managed to address some of the questions that were raised beforehand. I know I haven't been able to do so all of them. Hopefully some more of them may get answered by the last two presentations. If not, we can bring up with questions at the end. Okay, and over to Paul. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Paul, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Danny.
Cool.
Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Cool. Right, so my name is Paul Naylor. I know Lee's already done the introductions, but I'm a technical relationship consultant at Ordnance Survey. Got about 23 years experience. Kind of started off as a cartographer way back when in 1998, I think. Spent about 10 years there before moving on to focus more on kind of bespoke mapping and more kind of geographic data visualization as opposed to just mapping, kind of looking at other techniques and methods for mapping data and geographic data. So I'm here to talk to you about the kind of power of maps and some of the different map techniques and methods that are available to us for visualizing data. Now, as I'm sure we all know, everything happens somewhere, whether that is an emergency, a route we've walked, a place we've visited. But when you take that information and you map it, that's when, for me, it's really brought to life. And we can use that to then start analysing the data, making decisions, or it can allow us to answer questions that we had or that we didn't know we had. But it also allows us to gain insight as well. So to give you a quick example, we're all aware of what's been happening with regards to the COVID pandemic, and we can use maps in an incident like that to respond in the quickest and in the best possible way, whether that's in response to the pandemic itself or to report on statistical information about the pandemic. So maps can show us where the cases are highest or lowest in its simplest form. It can show us where things like a patient's nearest doctor's surgery is, or it can show us like what buildings could we utilise for vaccination centres or for testing sites. You know, the building's geography can tell us that. And maps have many uses, but it's important when we're visualising data that you have the right things in place before you start, because if you haven't got this all set up in the first instance, then your visualisation or your map might be worthless. So if you're going to visualise data with a geography, then you're going to want a base map most probably, and you're going to want a good one. Accuracy is so important. Danny and I, of course, and Lee, of course, are very biased, but if it's GB data you're after, then Ordnance Survey have been mapping it for many years and have some of the best surveyors and cartographers in the world for capturing that topographic detail and for visualising it accordingly. Danny's already mentioned the different types of data that we hold and we offer, and this data, as Danny said, is available in a range of different flavours, like your kind of popular GIS formats, APIs. And they're also available in a range of different styles. So, you know, we've created style sheets that allow you to do different things essentially with the data. So just to give you a kind of few examples, we've got a style called light, which is for kind of allowing people to add their own data on top. We've got outdoor, where the emphasis is on kind of things like woodland, green space, paths and tracks. And then you've got another one called roads, where the emphasis is on roads. And these are all free for people to take. So it's easier than ever to take contextual mapping and get started. And like Danny said, there is other map data available. Next up, you need to think about what data you need in order to answer the question you have or gain an insight that you're looking for. So you need to kind of start asking yourself questions like, what data do you have available? Does that data already exist? Or do you need to go out and capture it? How are you going to do that if you do need to go out and do that? how good is that data? Is it trustworthy? Can you rely on it? Does it need you to run any pre-analysis or prep it in any way before you can start to use it? Then once you've done that, you can start thinking about what's the best way to present that information. You know, how do you want to present that information to that end user? Because at the end of the day, the end visual map is the last piece of the jigsaw. So getting this right in terms of the method that you're going to use is really important. In the early stages of the COVID pandemic, there was some, what I think, and many others, were really bad maps and charts used by the Prime Minister at his nightly briefings at Downing Street, which, if you looked across social media, a lot of the public was struggling to interpret and understand. But luckily, because of some of the feedback that they received, they actually improved those. And you can see a real transition between what was being shown right at the start of the pandemic to kind of what filtered through as we moved along. So I'm going to talk a little bit about thematic mapping, different thematic mapping techniques. Now, for those that don't know what thematic mapping is, it's how we basically map a particular theme to a geographic area, and it tells us a story about a place, and it's commonly used to map things like climate issues, population densities, health issues, stuff like that. But it can be used for mapping many other issues as well. So when creating a thematic map, it's really important that we understand the data that we are planning to pick, and what the consequence might be if we represent that data incorrectly. Because quite often maps can sometimes be used to misinform, so making sure we choose the correct mapping technique is crucial. So first up is a dot density map, and that is simply a map that uses a dot to represent a feature. So that's a one-to-one dot density map, and so each dot is equally sized, and each dot represents the recording of a single thing. And really, when you're doing that type of map, each dot should be depicted in its correct spatial location. And the reason for that is just to kind of avoid the data being misrepresented, and then any message that you're trying to tell being lost. But you've also got a one-to-many dot density map. So each dot can then depict more than one recording of a thing. And you know what that amount is often determined by the map maker or the cartographer. And in this instance, a one-to-many map, dots can be randomly positioned and do not necessarily need to be represented their actual spatial location of something. And when creating a one-to-many dot density map, it's important to include a legend indicating the value that that single dot represents. So people are aware that one dot equals a certain amount of something. And this isn't new, you know, this is a method that's been used for many years. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with the English physician Jon Snow, and he used a dot density map in the 19th century when he mapped the location of cholera outbreaks. Some people often think that it was the map that led to the discovery of the water pump to where the cholera outbreak was coming from, but that's not the case. That had already been found out. They had already worked out that a specific water pump was the cause of the outbreak. Jon Snow just mapped the outbreaks around that water pump just to kind of confirm it. And it's a great example of a dot density map being used, and it's still often mentioned and used in presentations today around thematic mapping. And we use a kind of form of dot density map in some of the work we do. So the examples you can see on screen now, this is actually data from our OS Maps application. So people can upload routes of where they're walking or where they're running. And we took that data and we mapped it. And basically it allowed us to see where people were walking, where people were running, where people were uploading routes to the OS Maps application. Sounds really simple, but the great thing about it is, from our perspective, is that we can, you know, visualize where most popular areas are, and then you can take that data and do other things with it. So in this instance on the left, we've got Greater Manchester being shown with the routes from OS Maps being depicted in blue, but we've also added green space to that map, so you can see what areas of green space are more popular than others. So it's a great example of how you're taking some map data that already exists from people uploading it to our OS Maps application, and then we're adding in another data set in green space to kind of run that analysis and work out where people are walking and what areas of green space are more popular than others. And then on the right, you've got the same data set being used for the Peak District. And in this instance, we've just overlaid a grid, and we're just looking at the kind of 20 most popular grid squares in Great Britain in terms of where people are walking. But of course, you could quite easily overlay, like from our perspective, map sheet lines or something like that, and we can work out, you know, what sheets are where people are walking or people are uploading routes, and we might be able to use that information for our own benefit. Next up is a proportional symbol map, and this uses map symbols, circles, squares, whatever you might want to use, that vary in size to represent a numeric variable, basically. So to give you an example, circles may be used to show the location of cities within your map, and each circle can be sized proportionally to the population size of that city. So the larger the symbol, the more of something that exists at that location. And this style is very common for reporting instances of a health issue such as coronavirus, as it allows you to show proportionally the amount of cases per location, although it does have its drawbacks, so you do need to be careful with that one. And just to give you an example of where somebody, you know, I spoke earlier about where there were a lot of maps in the early stages of the coronavirus where people were depicting information and then kind of evolved that map based on feedback to a different style of thematic map. So this is Sam Joyner from the head of data and digital storytelling at the Times. And he had a circle proportional symbol map to show cases of the coronavirus. But as you can see, it got quite busy in different areas. So he decided to switch that out to what we call a kind of ridge map, where you've got these ridges showing values of the amount of people with coronavirus. And he did that for two key reasons. And the number of cases meant the circles were beginning to overlap, as you can see, making the areas and crucially the peaks really difficult to make out. But by adding the ridges in, it allowed him to then label the kind of peaks and the real places of interest, essentially. So, you know, you could call out the capitals, call out some of the countries in Wales and Northern Ireland as well. And they don't always work. You know, that's a great example of where proportional symbols don't work. And I think at those kind of smaller scales, that's when proportional symbols can let you down if you size them incorrectly. You know, you've got to be really careful with the kind of size variables that you apply to your data before you start visualizing it. But to give you some kind of advantages of a proportional symbol match, large quantities of data can be interpreted really quickly. You know, it's easier for somebody to look at a circle and see whether it's big and small to make a decision on, oh, you know, I can see there that within the UK, it has a large symbol on it. So that means it's going to be a larger something. If it's just a dot, you've then got to refer to the legend to work out what that dot actually means. So it's an example of a thematic mapping technique that's useful for visualizing differences between many places. It's easy to extract actual numbers from. You can use raw data, and smaller geographic regions are not overlooked. Of course, it has got disadvantages as well. As you can see from this example, as values get bigger, the symbols start to overlap. And then, of course, by doing that, the size of the symbol can then obscure the location. If you look at Europe on this example, it's very hard to make out where that is. And map readers do not always estimate area of a symbol well. So, you know, it's easy to see that a symbol's big, but what does that actually mean? What is the value attached to that symbol? It can be difficult to work that out sometimes. Next up is a Chloroplast Map. So this technique is used for when visualizing how a measurement varies across a geographic area. And I think Danny showed a few examples of Chloroplast maps that we've made in the past. And this is commonly used when looking at vote totals by a political party. So you've probably seen a lot of maps around the presidential race in America using a Chloroplast map, but just as common in the UK as well. But you need to be careful with Chloroplast maps because you should never use them for raw data. You know, what I mean by that is like an actual value, because quite often when people create a Chloroplast for something like what you're seeing on screen for London boroughs, they use raw data, but they don't take into consideration the amount of people that actually live in those boroughs. So quite often the data can be misinterpreted. So what do I mean by normalising your data? Well, if you look at each of the maps on screen at the moment, each area on the map is a different size. So a different area of that Chinese province is a different size. And that will of course have a different number of people living in it. So you cannot compare like for like across a Chloroplast map. So you would need to normalise your data first. You know, the maps on screen show how the coronavirus spread across China in the space of 10 days in January. And a Chloroplast map has been used with actual totals and a label to tell us the exact number of cases in the Hubei province. But of course, what it doesn't tell us is how many people live in each of those provinces in the surrounding areas. So is it 100 people? Is it 1,000? Is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? So if we're using totals, we may as well use a graph or chart, you know, if you're going to use actual values, because does the geography matter? You may as well just have a bar or chart with a bar telling you what country it is and showing you the amount of cases. But you know, if a map is really important for contextual purposes, then you know, I've seen maps with bar charts actually placed on top of the map, so you can do that. So if you do normalise your data to show the number of cases per, say, I don't know, 100,000 people, for instance, then what that does is it takes into account the population, basically, of each geographic region and allows you to interpret the map a lot easier. You know, because quite often you might look at a map and think, well, you know, the cases there are huge, but in relation to the actual amount of people that live there, it can be quite different. So, and I mentioned earlier that, you know, you've probably seen Chloroplast maps made in support of the presidential race in America. Donald Trump famously shared one with reporters in 2016. It depicted the results of the 2016 elections. Now, it was great for showing where people voted, but not for showing you actually how many people voted in each state. So if we use raw data, so if you're going to use raw data, to always don't use a Chloroplast map. That's what we're saying, because something like a proportional symbol map would have been a better way to represent the data and a more honest way. But of course, what Trump wanted to do was plaster America in red to show how great he was. You know, so he's using data for his benefit. But you could have used a proportional symbol map or a dot density map, which a guy called Ken Field at Esri, if you're familiar with him, did to show how Chloroplast map was not the right thematic mapping technique to use, basically. And of course, there are some advantages and disadvantages as well. Their Chloroplast maps are really easy to understand. They depict spatial distributions of data really well, and they pretty much work at any scale. The disadvantages are, think about things like black and white. If you've produced a map with certain colours and then it's going to be printed in a newspaper in black and white, or publication that's black and white, it's probably not going to work. When you use a Chloroplast map, it assumes the region area has the same value, so always make sure you normalise that data based on population. Smaller regions can sometimes get easily overlooked, so you do need to be a little bit careful there. You know, we've got some great examples in a use of ordnance survey. This is a HEX map where we've basically binned some data into 15-kilometre hex polygons, and then geographically visualize those. And the two you can see on screen at the moment, we're again taking our OS maps route data, but we were looking here at where people were walking and where people were not walking. And we did this 3 times. We did it across a period of 5 years. So I think from about 2015 to about 2020. And then we did it pre-lockdown and post-lockdown, just to see where people were walking. And then we added the national parks on the right hand side, you can see, showing where the national parks were, and you can quite clearly see where some of the more popular areas of GB were. And then on the left, the focus was more on where people were not walking. So the white hexagons are showing 15-kilometre hexagons, basically, in Great Britain, where people were not walking, and we pulled those out with labels to kind of show where those areas are. You know, and it's a great method, Chloroplast Maps, and a real popular method in terms of thematic mapping. Another method is a heat map, and when people want a real visual impact, this seems to be one of the favourite amongst many people, and it's basically used to represent the density of data and gradients of colour. You know, through the creation of a hotspot, it allows you to quickly identify specific areas of interest, basically, for further analysis. You know, if you see a darker shade of a colour, you can tell that there's more of something happening in that particular area. So it's used to map things like crime hotspots or temperature, most commonly. That's just an example. I mean, ironically, for this one, it's a heat map showing nitrogen dioxide levels in China since lockdown was enforced. So it's a great way of showing the difference between, you know, kind of pre-lockdown, post-lockdown, and what those levels were. So, you know, it's that sort of data that it's used for to great effect, to be fair. It can be done badly, though. You know, I spoke earlier about how good is your data? Can you trust it? Is it reliable? The guy that made this is quite well known for kind of taking data and making it look like a photo, essentially. But this particular data is from NASA, and it seeks out hotspots. So it was looking at wildfires in Australia, but of course, the data that they had didn't only pick out wildfires, it was even good enough to pick out things like bonfires and barbecues and stuff like that. So you've got to be careful and actually understand your data before you start visualizing, because if you don't, you can see how your map or visualization can quickly get shared. Rihanna, in this instance, spreading it, and of course it can spread false information. Advantages of this technique: hotspots and data can be quickly identified and analysed further. It works well with specific data sets like temperature or pollution data. Disadvantages: sometimes people go nuts with colour, and it can affect the legibility of the map. It's really overused. A lot of people tend to use this as their default when it's probably not the best thematic mapping technique to use, and it doesn't depict data distribution very well. It can be difficult to kind of decipher specific locations of data sometimes. And we use it, you know, for different things. This is a couple of maps we did in conjunction with the RNLI. They released some of their data a few years ago now. 2018, I think, was. This particular data covers an 8-year period from 2008 to 2016. But we just worked with them to kind of do a kind of marketing piece around the fact that they'd released this data about where their incidents were and what those incidents were as well, and where they were. And this just shows the kind of spread of where the RNLI stations are across GB's coastline, but as well what type of incidents where their incidents were and where their false alarms calls were as well. So a really good technique. This was just done in a GIS in QGIS. But what's great about this is there's not a lot of contextual mapping. You know, we've just kind of added this beautiful hill shade and let the data do the talking, so we've not confused the user with a lot of topographic detail. And then the last thematic mapping technique I wanted to talk to you about was equal area cartograms. So cartograms use geographic shapes essentially to represent things like countries, to size regions, and they size regions based on a data value. So it can be things like population or something like that. But an equal area cartogram, the one difference is that every shape that you use has the same size. So regardless of the size of like a London Borough, for example, all of them are shown in the same size, whilst keeping all of the other aspects associated with the cartogram. Their spatial relationship, you know, it should remain as close as possible. And you can kind of see from ours, if I overlaid a map underneath that, it's not a bad fit. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. And there are loads of these cartograms available, because everybody's interpretation of things like where, if you're making like an equal layer cartogram of county boundaries in GBR or London boroughs, everyone's interpretation is different. We've done our own at OS. You can find them using that link at the bottom there if you were interested in using cartograms. And they're great for doing things like this. This is a dashboard for the United States based on data that was collected by the New York Times. And they're just using an equal area cartogram to show states and information around COVID associated to those states. But you could use these to depict things like London boroughs, counties, AONBs, national parks, and then you can add your own data on top of that. So if you've got data around things like visitor density and things like that, you can add that data on top and show it in the form of a chart or a graph or something like that. The advantages, disadvantages: advantages, visually appealing, they look great. You can add further data sets onto the data. Region areas are all the same size, so smaller areas don't get lost, and it allows you to label each region accordingly. And the real disadvantage of them, there aren't many for me, but the real disadvantage of them, of course, is that they're not always 100% accurate in terms of their location, so that can cause problems. But yeah, that's equal layer cartograms. But there are other methods that we're just touching on, some thematic mapping techniques, but we do use some other methods at Ordnance Survey. Animation is really popular, and there are different ways. So if you've got temporal data with a time element, there are a range of tools that you can use to animate that. To give you an example, on the right here, it's a startup called Pedals, who use cycles basically to deliver parcels, etc. And they wanted an animation to kind of show how far across London in the 24-hour, or not in a 24-hour period, but in a shift that one of their cyclists could get, and to kind of show you, how more economical it was to use them as opposed to a delivery firm that were using mopeds or vans, etc. Story maps are a great tool as well. Oh, sorry, let's go back one. Bear with me. So story maps are a great tool as well. There are a range of different people. Also, there's a range of different ways of using tool maps in different ways. This is Esri story maps, so it's really intuitive. You don't need to know code, but you can basically prep maps in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro, and then you can use their story map interface or their story map application to then create a narrative that's kind of informed by the maps that you've already put together in ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Online. And they've got loads of different functionality attached with that. So you can have things like a scrolling narrative, or as you scroll through the narrative, the map starts moving to different locations, or as you scroll through the narrative, more data starts to appear and disappear, or more pictures appear and things like that. So it's a great tool. But there are other ways of creating story maps. There's some really great HTML examples out there. Mapbox, if you're familiar with those guys or want to Google them, they've got some great code that you can literally cut and paste and start editing to create your own. So that's a great tool. And then there's also some other great software out there as well that allows you to do different things with data. This is Tableau on screen at the moment. And basically what you're able to do is I've loaded our data to Mapbox, and I can pull our data in from Mapbox, but you can also use our APIs in this. And then I've overlaid the RNLI data that I was telling you about earlier. And by just using Tableau, you can start zooming to individual RNLI stations, and then you can filter on attribution within that data. So I can start filtering by what type of casualty it was and what the outcome was. So was it a false alarm? Was it an actual incident, etc. But there are other dashboard software other than Tableau, so things like Insights and stuff like that. And then the last one, this was just an example of how you can use PowerPoint basically to animate, to present information. This was something we did for a project called Smart Cities for Manchester a few years ago, and we were just showing how specific data sets could be used to inform policy decision making. So to give you an example on the screen, this was looking at car parks and how if you've got that real-time information being fed back to you about when specific car parks are busy or not busy, you can use that information to kind of make decisions around whether or not those car parks should be used for different things at different times of the day. But it's the same thing around things like adding pollution monitors to things like traffic lights and stuff like that. You know, how can that data then be used to do different things? But like I say, this was made using PowerPoint and a number of different animation techniques within there, so quite simple but really effective. And that's me really. So just to kind of finish, there's loads of data out there, and there's so much data to add. You just got to be a bit careful, you know, on what data you use to make sure, you know, is it reliable, is it accurate, is it trustworthy, is it going to do what you want it to do? And then once you've got that, you know, think about the visualization method that you're going to use to then represent that data, whether it's to kind of present your data to your user, whether it's for your own benefit to help you answer a question, or whether it's to use to kind of form some kind of analysis. You know, I love maps, they're great, and they've got so many uses, and for me, they just bring data to life. But yeah, that's me.
Great stuff. Thanks ever so much, Paul, and thank you, Danny, for a presentation earlier. Lovely to see so much data being kind of shared and explained as to what Ordnance Survey kind of hold as well. And just a reminder to most people on the call, you're probably public sector employees anyway, so you know, a lot of this data is absolutely free for you guys as well. So it would be worth getting hold of Ordnance Survey, your account manager, or somebody internal into your own organisation, just to make sure that you are making the best use of all the data that you've got hold of as well. And the guys, Paul and Danny, do an enormous amount of work in terms of consultancy as well, and a breadth of experience that I hope they've showcased for you today to be able to just kind of help you understand this data and explain it in the right way, as we've seen, as opposed to the wrong way, which we've also seen as well. So some really great examples there. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so Paul, Tom, are you ready? I think you're on mute.
Just sharing my screen, so hopefully everyone can see that now.
Excellent, great stuff. So over to Tom from Strava Metro.
Fantastic, thank you so much, and that was really interesting, the first two presentations there. I've definitely got some really interesting kind of ideas and maybe some questions I wanted to ask as well, but that was fascinating. Thank you very much for inviting me to today's session. My name is Tom, and I work for Strava Metro, which is part of Strava, and I can share a little bit more about that information. My role within Strava Metro is around partnerships and developing relationships with as many public sector, planning organisations, outdoor recreational land management organisations, and getting the Strava Metro data into the public realm. And I'm going to share some case studies today of how we've been able to do that so far. I'm based in London, even though Strava is a kind of San Francisco based company. For my kind of background academically, I confess I'm not a geospatial analyst or engineer, but I am a mapping enthusiast, probably like many people on the call today. So again, I'll try my best to answer some of the technical questions as we go through, but hopefully you'll see that Strava Metro has been designed for both technical and non-technical people as well. So in terms of Strava, for those that aren't familiar, Strava's vision and I suppose our mission is really to be the record of the world's athletic activities. Now, the Strava kind of core team would say that if you sweat or if you do any sort of physical activity, then you're an athlete. So again, if you're joining Strava, you can count yourself as an athlete on that front. But we want to be that record so we can see that every effort counts. So at the moment, I think there's roughly over 30 different activity types that you can upload on Strava, from stand-up paddleboarding through to kite surfing, through to the more popular cycling, walking and running. which will be the focus of today's conversation as well. In terms of the actual way that Strava works, again, for those that aren't familiar, our members upload recreational but also commuting activities via the Strava app, also via smartwatches, fitness devices, of which there's many now, or just uploading it through your computer as well. Our kind of mission really in terms of being that connected fitness and being the record of your activities stems from the fact that we want all devices to be able to kind of connect into Strava, and the community element of Strava is probably the biggest part of what we do. So again, I don't have the exact percentages, but not everyone chooses to upload via the app, but we do have strong partnerships with the likes of Garmin, Wahoo, all of the different fitness watches that obviously can capture the ride, walk, or activities that you may be doing. And I mentioned the community there because I think the power of getting outdoors and being active, is done through other people making you feel like you want to be active. I think just in terms of the kind of the community, we think that for every minute you spend on Strava, there's roughly about 30 minutes of activity you can then attribute to that. So the secret sauce behind the 95 million kind of athletes that we've got now on the platform and growing is the fact that other people make other people active. And again, despite being in San Francisco, 82% of the activities that happen are located outside of the United States. And I think we've got about 195 countries active now around the world. To bring it back to a more kind of local audience in the UK, we've got something like 9 million members now, adult members, so who've joined Strava. And in the last year, like many people would have seen from various different news outlets and of course experiencing the restrictions that we had, maybe you saw it in your local community or on your usual walking or running route, there was a huge boom in physical activity. So we saw roughly about 108% rise in medium activities last year, just in terms of cycling, walking and running. And the good news is there was a balance in both male and female athletes that were uploading. So again, for any kind of questions or concerns about any gender biases within the Strava community, I'm happy to talk about that today as well. We definitely saw an increase in walking and running. I think that was largely due to the gyms being closed. And again, I think just in total, there was something like 15% more time was spent on an activity on Strava in 2020 than perhaps in previous years. So I think the secret or the kind of mission really for those on the call that are responsible for kind of encouraging people to be physical, to be active and outdoors is to capture the imagination of the kind of I suppose the happier side of 2020, which was a more hopefully active nation, and take that into kind of 2021 and beyond. And I think a lot of that can be done through path management, land usage, and using data to obviously improve access, infrastructure and trails. And that's where Strava Metro comes along. And that's what I'm going to focus on now today. So in terms of Metro, Metro kind of started around the same time as Strava in 2008. So when people first joined Strava, it was very much through antiquated GPS technology, but essentially it would upload into what we then called the big green machine. And very quickly, the community started to grow in North America. And people like the Oregon Department for Transportation reached out to Strava and said, hey, we really appreciate some of this data because we keep seeing lots of mountain bikers and walkers and cyclists on the trails. Do you have access to this? And so Strava Metro was born. And I think Oregon was one of our first customers. It started off as a paid license for Strava Metro, so it was a business arm of Strava. And I'm pleased to say, as we'll come on to today, this is now a free service as well. So the evolution of Strava Metro has gone from being a paid license fee. There's quite a lot of engineering uplift. Again, for those with the geospatial background and technical ability on the call, every time we would onboard a new customer or a new area of interest, we would then have to do a custom shape for that area. Often there's different base maps that people might be using. We'd have to clean that data up and then manually deliver that through a shapefile or spreadsheet. And of course, that meant that all this data was available in ArcGIS or QGIS. but it didn't really help in terms of scalability. So we realized very quickly that we probably should build a product which was a little bit more scalable and easier to access. At the heart of what we do at Strava Metro is the authenticity of who gets access to the data. So the mission behind Strava Metro is to empower communities and make this data more accessible, efficient, and effectively make active transportation, so any human-powered journey, safer. And that authenticity still stays the same now, even though this is a free service that people can apply for access to. We don't give access to private equity businesses or housing developers, perhaps, who might be interested in leveraging the kind of the price of land due to its popularity for recreational usage. But we do give access to, for example, local authorities who are working to build more accessible infrastructure in their region, or they're interested in there. And of course, we open it up to advocacy groups, so walking groups, cycling groups who are looking to understand patterns of activity within their area as well. And that authentic mission, like I say, is the key to what makes this work, because without the crowdsourced element of Strava Metro and I suppose the buy-in from the Strava community, then we wouldn't have this amazing data set to offer to the world as well. And I can take more questions and kind of talk about this as we go through. So Strava Metro, like I say, we weren't a scalable platform. Sorry, it was a scalable platform, but we were obviously relied on a lot of engineering time and analytics team. We're actually a team of 6 within Strava, but the kind of engineering time, custom requests, public procurement barriers that came along meant that obviously the more customers we onboarded, the harder it was to kind of scale. So we built MetroView and made Metro free for anyone to access. That meant that we just use one base map now. So we use OpenStreetMap as our base map for all the activities, but it allows for the self-service download of GIS data. You can start to look at monthly, yearly, weekly data from the Strava community. Of course, this is aggregated and anonymized, so you can't see any individual trips. But this data uploads on a monthly basis, so you can start to extract it. And through the magic of the Strava time machine, it all goes back in time to 2017 as well. So you can start to see growth in your area and see what's changed and which paths have become more popular. Certainly, again, the caveat being this is just the Strava community, but hopefully the fact that I mentioned the 9 million athletes that we've got in the UK makes it representative, or at least allows for some sort of correlation to understand what the kind of ratio is of Strava versus non-Strava activities as well. Like I say, the data is obviously designed for those with technical and non-technical abilities, but it's all able to be extracted from Strava Metro, so you can use this alongside other GIS software that you've got. You can see here on the right-hand side, it breaks it down by time, hours of the day, days of the week, the actual number of activities along each edge. So again, the edge is being aligned to OpenStreetMap as our base map. And on the people tab, you can start to see the male-female splits and then age as well. Strava's become a lot younger over the last few years as well. So again, we're starting to see a lot more 13 to 35-year-olds using Strava as well, which is really exciting for obviously kind of capturing a more active and outdoor focused audience. The dashboard, like I say, is basically created when you apply for a Strava Metro account. So we only go to a county boundary level. So again, if you're a local authority, or if you're a planning organisation or a land management from Dorset, for example, you would get access to the shapefile of Dorset or Norfolk or Surrey or wherever it might be. And then we would show you the activity count based on that region of interest. And you can start to filter between bicycle data and then pedestrian data as well. We only focus on those 2 terrestrial based activities because, as you saw from the other presentation, water based activities are slightly harder to map, and we would have to do that through HEX diagram, I think, also mapping on using hexagons. So we decided just to focus on bicycle and pedestrian activity, pedestrian being running, walking and hiking as well. Once you move away from the dashboard, you then start to see different elements. Some of you may be familiar with the heat map, but here we're looking at Studland. and the area obviously in Dorset, beautiful kind of countryside, are very popular, of course, with recreational and leisure trips. And we can start to see a raster representation of the Strava activity over the course of 1 year. So again, this is publicly recorded activities on Strava, and we can start to see where are the most kind of popular heat lines, just to allow a very high level overview of what's going on. Again, we're looking at cycling data here, but we can then look at running and walking if we wanted to switch. We also are able to show corridors of travel. So again, I'm switching to a more urban example here, but if we were to look at popular corridors, which is showing routes between, say, in this example, between 0 and 5 miles, we can see based on the Strava community in London, as you would expect, the cycle superhighways come up as one of the most kind of popular route choices in London. And we can see the time of day on the map, which is showing us when these route choices are most popular. So of course, outside of London, other cities are available, of course, but you can start to see where are the most popular corridors of travel when it comes to cycling, and again, the time of day that might be taking place. Transport for London are one of our partners, and they're able to manage the traffic light system in the morning and in the evening, obviously, to accommodate more active transportation journeys, and then obviously allocate road space and road management through that. Of course, this can be used on any trail or path or wherever there's Strava activity on an edge, we could do exactly the same thing as well. And in this example, we're seeing a bit of an anomaly in Dorking. So anyone familiar with Surrey will know that this is Ranmore, Leith Hill, around the Surrey Hills of Dorking. And we can see the most popular corridor here of travel is showing something that happens at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, like thousands and millions of others around the country. This is a park run. So for land managers who do have activities that take place, such as a park run, you can start to see, again, the time of day that's taking place. Obviously, if you were to go into a little bit more mapping detail, you could see how many people were perhaps cycling to that activity, to the start and the end point, where people would then otherwise have driven, and you can start to obviously again allocate resources depending on the information that you're seeing. We also included a routing tool which allows you to see origin and destination points between the two examples here, which is up in North Yorkshire. The blue line here dictates that the most direct route versus the orange line, which is looking at the most popular route on Strava. So again, not necessarily always the most direct route is the most popular, but it does allow you to understand, again, looking at origin destination points, what would be the preferred route based on the crowdsourced element of the Strava Metro data. And I think the most powerful thing for a lot of people on the call here today who might be interested in applying and using Strava Metro is to understand the physical counts that are taking place. So this is the kind of the key to what we're offering for obviously no charge to people who are interested in path and land management. We can see here the trail up to the top of Snowdon, and we can see the data showing us August 2021. Again, the time of day and the volumes by hour and the day of the week. So if you want to climb up Snowdon in August, it looks like Wednesday and Thursday are a great day to do that. But also we can go back in time on the left-hand side to 2016 and by month to understand how that's increased over time as well. Like I say, this is any edge where there's obviously data attributed to it on OpenStreetMap as well. So let's have a look at some case studies. So I think one of the most popular use cases of Strava Metro data is looking at bicycle or walker counter correlation. Of course, the Strava Metro data is completely biased towards the Strava community, but as we've seen on the presentation today, there are loads of other data sets out there that you can start to have a kind of correlation with counter data and then Strava data. This example using in Helsinki, showing the blue line, which is a fixed counter along a route, and the orange line being Strava activity. I think what we've found from a lot of our partners, both UK and international, that there is a strong correlation between Strava activity and the counter activity. So again, if you've got trails, paths where you've got fixed counters and wanted to access the Strava data, you could then start to understand what the relationship with and that correlation, which really helps then to model the total number of walkers, runners, or cyclists in your region. And of course, some of the kind of impact work that we do is looking at the before and after effects of new infrastructure. Again, I'm focusing on a slightly urban example here, but of course, this could be attributed to any trail or edge around the world, both rural and urban. But you can see here a new cycleway was built along the left-hand side, and we can see the before and after effects that had on having a new piece of infrastructure. Again, purely based on Strava activity, but it allows you to see those quick impacts that you might want to kind of look for justifying and evaluating the use of a new path. We've also done some really interesting things with the mapping data and with Strava data to look at the relationship between, say, slope and travel time. Around the world, we've seen a huge amount of wildfires and forest fires. And again, we have been able to work with researchers who are looking at Strava Metro data to understand the time it took for people to kind of walk or run uphill versus downhill, but also then looking at some of the flat usage. By leveraging a lot of this Strava data, they were able to kind of quantify that the slope travel rate, and then really start to allocate to kind of understanding of if there's a forest fire going on, would it make sense to kind of drive a bit further up to a slightly lesser slope because you'd access the fire perhaps in a shorter amount of time, or perhaps it'd be better to kind of be further away due to the kind of topography. So there's some really interesting use cases that we do work with academics and researchers on. And we're happy to take applications from that aren't necessarily just involved in urban planning, to anything really that looking at safety and trail usage. Safety being obviously a big reason for a lot of active transportation, cycling, and walking and running planners. Using the example in Seattle, we were able to layer on top of open data, which was bicycle crashes and the cycling activity, and look at what the characteristics of different types of intersections were that contributed to collisions or crashes. So if you know that there's a particular junction, I think there was an example earlier last year in the New Forest where there was a particularly bad signage for drivers and cyclists, and you can now start to understand perhaps how many cyclists would be kind of using a specific path, and if it would benefit from having better signage, or is it an intersection that's high risk as well. Air pollution, I think was mentioned on one of the other presentations, but it was interesting just to kind of look at particulate matter when mapped alongside other kind of bicycle and walking data. What we often find is that where you kind of put infrastructure next to a high stress route, for example, if you make something more walkable or more cyclable by just kind of putting it next to a trunk road or a main road, the benefits of being healthy and walking and active might then be obviously outweighed by the fact that you're breathing in higher levels of particulate matter. So again, the Strava Metro data really hopefully encourages planners to think about where they would kind of layer in different kind of connected travel routes as well. Down in Dartington, which is in the West Country, we work with the West Country Rivers Trust, and they were able to use some of the Strava Metro data to look at asset management, so the path management on the estate, the Dartington estate. You can start to see that they were able to extract a lot of the Strava data, look at the activity counts per day, and then break that down by seasonality, but then also look at the temporal patterns on the right-hand side in Strava activity from weekday to weekend. So again, any landowners or land management representatives here, you can start to understand, again, probably through data that you already have layered into on top with Strava data, what paths may need to be open and closed based on usage and time of year that they might be popular as well. We've got some other use cases, again, from around the world that we look at. So we're looking at kind of hedgerow and path maintenance. Oxfordshire County Council have done a lot of work with us on that. So again, you can start to understand if there's a high kind of amounts of activity taking place on a rural route, that those signages perhaps might need to be prioritised before when you're looking at hedgerow and path maintenance. And then finally, again, I mentioned that we kind of did look at beach and coastal management. Even though we can't show you the number of activities that happen on water, what's really interesting is perhaps you can start to see where journeys head to enter the water. So again, with Natural Resource Wales, they were interested in understanding where people were kind of cycling or running to then enter into the water. So the heat map does show the heat lines of water-based activity, but not the exact counts. Again, I think we had the example in Germany where they were looking at the relationship between clean water and if people were prepared to cycle or run further to a cleaner river or a cleaner part of a stream or lake to access that for recreational activity. So thank you for letting me talk at you. I'm looking forward to some of the questions. You can apply for Strava Metro. Like I say, it's totally free. We just asked that you write a bit of a use case of why you want to be kind of working with the data, and then just apply with your organizational email, not your personal email. And we're happy to open this up to those that are involved in planning. But thank you, and I will pause and hopefully de-share my screen.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tom. What a fantastic way to end. Lots and lots of kind of really fantastic data being shown and how that can be overlaid onto maps there. So yeah, hopefully a really, really good webinar, which I hope everybody's enjoyed. We've had quite a few questions coming in. Luckily, because Danny and Paul went first, they've been whizzing through and answering some of theirs. But there's a couple coming through from you, for you, Tom. One in particular where you just touched on the last case study around hedgerows and Oxford County Council. I think Keris would like to know, interested whether any authorities are using Strava Metro to inform rights of way improvement plan assessments to understand existing and predicted future use.
Yeah, definitely. So I think now I don't know the exact number of local county councils who have now accessed this, but again, through working with people like the Department for Transport, Highways England, and a top-down approach, I think word's now got out that this is available for the LC WIP planning, so the local cycling, walking infrastructure programs that are around the country. And from what I've understood, is that they are starting to look at some of the rights of ways. Does a path have trail management? Does a path have history of usage, no usage, etc.? I should note, because I know one of these questions did come up in the preamble to this, that there might be a few private landowners or people interested in Strava activity that travels across private land. You can join the Strava community and flag an activity as inappropriate if you think an activity is passed over a piece of land that's private, and we would flag that to the community member that's done that. You can't, again, for those not to get too much in the weeds, but Strava has a competitive edge to it as well. So it's free to download, but there is a paid version where a lot of people access things like segments. If a segment passes over private land, you can again request that Strava remove that segment, so people would not travel across private land as well. So you can flag that, and I'll share more details with the organisation team here of how to do that.
Fantastic, great stuff. Thank you, Tom. I think that answers a follow-up question around kind of illegal land use as well, and kind of removing those maps. And I should add, OS Maps has a facility to use that as well. We work with the MOD quite extensively to remove routes that appear across their land as well. So just need to kind of get in contact with us at OS Maps, and we can remove those as well. Likewise, same as Tom. If anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask Tom, Paul, or Danny, please just kind of raise your hands and we'll come to you in due course. If not, we can just kind of rattle through some of the questions that are kind of coming up as well. There was one around for Tom again around people have been applying to use Strava on their dashboard. I think there was one from maybe Northern Ireland, but it didn't seem to get approved. So what's the process for kind of going through and making sure that people today can use your data?
Yeah, really good question. And so just to give you an idea, so we're a team of 6 within 300 at Strava. So Strava Metro was gifted to the world, and of course, you know, what came with that was a much more reduced kind of operational service behind it. So a lot of the work now for applications has kind of been done through an automated process. So we've gone from about 300 to over 2,000 partners now who've accessed the data, but we do filter out personal email addresses just purely because when accepting the terms and conditions and liability for that or accessing the data, I think it removes or declines access for Gmail, Hotmail. So if possible, even if you're working for an advocacy group or a trail organization or a community outreach, try and use, or not try, please do use your organizational email address. The other reason why we sometimes decline as well is not enough information about why you wanted access. So there is a good text box just to kind of give some confirmation about why access might be granted. With academic applications, we will try and review as many as possible, but we want them to have the biggest impact as possible as well. So again, try and give a bit more kind of detail as to what it is that the project's doing.
Yeah, fantastic, great stuff, thank you. Question from Kelly, two questions actually, about Strava data. What proportion of Strava users publicly upload their data? And then as a follow-up, do these proportions differ by activity type, i.e. are runners more likely to make their activity public than cyclists?
Yeah, really good question. The kind of the Strava Metro project doesn't work without the Strava community obviously kind of buying into the idea behind uploading it. So when you join Strava, you are automatically opted into the Strava Metro project, but you only upload, it only contributes when it's publicly shared. So I don't know what the exact percentage is of kind of publicly shared data, but what we do have now on Strava, for those that, for example, felt a bit funny uploading their activity, you can hide the activity from your feed as well. So even if you don't want everyone to see that you've, say, walked to the shops or gone for a walk at lunchtime, you can hide that from your home feed, but then also contribute to Metro as well. In terms of walking, running and cycling, again, I'll try and get back to that. It's a really good question. So look out on Twitter or on the follow-up questions for that answer.
Great stuff, thank you. Yeah, and I guess just following up from that from Claire as well, in terms of a question around lots and lots of questions obviously being asked. We're not going to get time to go through them all, sadly, but we will make these all questions available to all of the presenters so that we can answer them in due course, and then we'll get them included on the email that we send back out to everybody with all the slides and the recording. So hopefully everybody will be able to kind of get their questions answered if we can't pick out the random selections that we do right now. I guess one that's coming up that's been kind of upweighted as well is around the example that you gave a few moments ago, Tom, of people being able to remove some of those routes. Susan's saying that likewise we have issues with Strava activity in inappropriate places. For example, competitive cycling on walking routes through SSIs. This is not a private land issue. Can it be dealt with by reporting a segment?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I'll share the link just in terms of flagging a segment that if it is on a walking route, then we'll remove that from a segment. So again, people don't feel the kind of urge to then take on that segment as a challenge as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Great stuff. Excellent. Thank you. I think we're probably getting close to the end now, so we will wrap it up there. But if anybody does have any more kind of questions, then please feel free to put them in the meeting chat in the next sort of couple of minutes or so. And as I said, we'll kind of get those back out to all of the presenters, and we'll get the responses out to you in due course. Cool. Excellent. Jane or Elizabeth, can I have the last slide set, please? Fantastic, thank you. So just kind of one thing to wrap up on, really. We've kind of been running some of these kind of webinars over the past few months, and certainly while the pandemic has been on. Obviously a lot easier to run these than the face-to-face meetings that we have. What we'd really like is your feedback. You know, feedback is fantastic. We send out kind of emails and questionnaires after the event, but it kind of drops off a little bit because people forget. So if you do have kind of anything to say, any improvements that we can make, anything you like, anything you dislike that we can kind of improve in future for these, then please pop them in the chat now as well, and we'll go back and we'll look at all of that feedback immediately, and then we'll kind of make improvements for everybody as we move forward. We're probably going to be running the webinars for a good few months yet, until we get into a position where everyone is comfortable with face-to-face meetings as well. So any kind of advice or help you can give us in regard to feedback would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. So in terms of kind of post events and resources and recordings, obviously we have recorded this. We will make that available. We've already said that we will go through and provide all of the answers to all of the questions as well. If you can get or would like to kind of maintain contact with us on social media, you can see our Twitter handle there, and we're also on LinkedIn. It's a fantastic way to not just rely on the emails that get sent out, but also to keep up to date with what's going on in the industry and get all the regular news that you'd expect. In terms of what we've got coming up in terms of a schedule of activities, we've got an ORN member meeting today from 12:45 to 1:30. So if you would like to attend that, then there's a link there that you can have out. That's probably been sent out on your email. On Tuesday the 28th, we've got an ORN action plan key stakeholder meeting, and that's where we go through and we look at what is it that we want to be able to share in terms of best practice events that we're putting on in the future. So again, if you're free, then please drop along to that and have your say. We've taken on board all of those kind of factors. It is a kind of a group where we represent all of the members, so everybody has a voice, and we can kind of go through and work out what's program of events that we'd like to put on over the next year or so. Then on 17th of November, key learnings from engaging the new visitor on responsible use. Then on the 15th of December, we have another webinar with festive member meeting, getting the most out of population data. So some really good stuff kind of coming up. And next slide set, please. And again, lastly, from me, if you wish to know more about ORN and help us with our mission, which is collaborate with members, sharing research, facilitate information exchange and champion sustainable use and good practice, then please go onto the website outdoorrecreation.org.uk/about-us, and you can find out all sorts of information. You can also sign up to be members, sign up to the newsletters and get all of the information to make sure that you've got it at the touch of a button. I see that there's lots and lots more questions coming through and lots of great feedback, so thank you ever so much for that. It's 12:30 on the dot, so we'll close there. Just a final massive thank you for me for joining us today. I hope you found that really interesting. Any more feedback, then just get in contact with any of the team or on the email that we'll send you, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Bye.